People are so scared to even talk about the topic that we allow it to thrive in silence without even realising.
I've still had responses from people saying, people won't listen to that, will they? Why would people listen to a podcast on child sexual abuse?
Talk joyfully about the abuse itself, but we do take humour in the way it's currently responded to.
Some of these conversations that I have and just the pure response that I get from people, it is laughable and it is comical, because you stand there and you think, oh my God, I'm a lot stronger than I was even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, really.
It never happens to someone until it does, and if more than 4 people, it's likely that it has already entered your sphere.
Until everyone starts talking about this and taking it as seriously as it actually is, we're not going to eradicate it.
I think when someone trusts you with an experience like their sexual violence, they are saying to you, I want you to be someone who shows up for me, who supports me. It's a gift that deserves the right amount of grace and care and holding.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Be Brave Project podcast. Today's conversation is a little bit different, and honestly one I'm really excited about. We talk a lot on this podcast about lived experience, but today we're talking about solutions, about how we actually start to change things. And I'm joined by Sophia Lu, a Vietnamese-British designer and founder of Secrets Worth Sharing. Sophia works at the intersection of design, creativity and social change, specifically around childhood sexual abuse. She's worked with global organisations, represented the UK on the Survivor Council for the first ever global ministerial conference on ending childhood violence, and has developed a really unique approach to talking about these topics called Serious Joy. So Sophia, I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Chloe.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So before we get into your work, I'd love to just start with you and who you are. So would you be able to describe what you do in your own words and who Sophia is?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sophia. I'm someone who experienced sexual abuse as a child. And now I direct a nonprofit, and the whole point of the nonprofit is to give people advice about how to talk about childhood sexual abuse with serious joy. So that's the tagline.
What drew you into the space professionally? I know you just said that you experienced it when you were a child. So is that what drew you, or is there anything else that drew you into this professionally specifically?
So I'd been working as a design researcher for a while, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in a little bit. And design is all about finding solutions to different problems, but in a creative way. And for a really long time, I was working in racism in healthcare. So how do we make healthcare environments less racially biased? And I was just thinking, there must be a way that we can apply this to sexual abuse. And I think, like most people who've experienced some form of sexual harm, there's 2 or 3 main avenues, right? The first avenue is, this has happened, I don't want to think about it anymore, I'm just going to get on and live my life.
Yeah.
There's another stage where it's like, this thing has absolutely crushed me and I need time to heal, or I'm going to take coping mechanisms. Some are healthy, some less so healthy, but I'm going to keep that in my lane and deal with it in my own way. And then I think there's a set of people who are like, this has happened and I don't want this to happen to anyone else, and I feel like I need to do something about it. And I feel like a lot of people who have experienced sexual harm, there is that level of altruism of wanting to do something good about it.
Yeah.
But as with everything, it's like taking the first step. So I was like, oh, I'm at a point in my life now where a lot of my close friends and family know about the abuse I experienced. And I know for a lot of people, that's a huge step to even get past itself. And then I was like, how do I take this step further? How do I do work in this space? But how do I do work in this space that is appropriate to the skills I have? I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a medical professional, I don't want to work in the police or the social services sector, but I am a designer and I'm a pretty good communicator. So how can I combine those things together and use it to give people practical advice about how to support survivors? And then I started applying for some funds, like some little seed grants to get started. And then that's when I got a £2,000 grant, like a tiny little grant.
Mhm.
And I was like, with this grant, I'm going to professionally film 7 podcasts that focus on the intersections of how abuse is affected by your identity. So, for example, how is the experience of childhood sexual abuse different if you're a man, or if you're queer, or if you're Black, or in my case, if you're Vietnamese? And interviewed somebody who was either experienced of sexual harm or had experience professionally with sexual harm. And they just went from there, really, and just turned into an organization.
Amazing. Honestly, that is so amazing. And you just explained it in such an articulate, beautiful way. And I think you've taken something that you know how to do and what to do, and you've made something so positive out of something so, let's face it, hideous. And you've turned it into something pretty incredible. Yeah, that's amazing. And I've been following you for quite some time actually, and I found you on my Instagram, and I just think, yeah, what you do is amazing, and you word it in such a beautiful way for people to really understand, and you can definitely see your design background coming into it. So yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you, Han. Ditto.
You're welcome. So going on to the design, the next sort of bit that I wanted to go on to. So I think when people hear the word design, they do think like visuals and branding, which obviously it is to some extent, but you're using design in a completely different way, which you just explained. So can you explain what design actually means when it comes to tackling something like childhood sexual abuse?
Yeah, totally. I think to answer this question, you need to go a step back to
Yeah.
address the visual branding elephant in the room, right? So when I tell people I'm a designer, they think you must design posters because there's no
Yeah.
chance in hell she's a fashion designer, right? They take one look at me and they're like, no. But when we pull apart visual branding, what is that really? That is, how do you take information? How do you strip it down to its barest form? And how do you communicate that in a way that your desired audience will understand? And I think those are the key elements that I use. It's just, instead of turning those into like pretty posters, which we do sometimes at Secrets, it's more, how do you adopt that way that designers think to target the actual problem at hand and then come up with a creative solution to that problem? So to put it in a simple way that people might understand is, I remember a few years ago, I was hearing about a case study, and I think it was a government in Germany wanting to give German language lessons to people who were new to the country, where German might not be their first language, and wanted to get more comfortable. And they particularly wanted to appeal to Turkish migrants. And the idea was like, here's free German language lessons. Ratatatatata. I'm not sure if this is the right country, but I'm ready for it. And they were really surprised because they were like, nobody is taking us up on these language lessons. Like, what? It's free. We've thought about when we're going to do it. We've tried to target like times where we think people would be free, blah, blah, blah. We know the community wants these, but no one is signing up. The answer was all of their comms for the German language lessons were in German. So the people who couldn't speak German, who'd want to learn the German language lessons, they don't even know that this thing is available because they can't read it. So design is not just, how do we make this pretty German language poster? It's what is the process of research that goes behind us understanding who our audience is and how to communicate. And that kind of section of it, which is known professionally as design research or user research, because you want the person to use the thing, is the field that I was part of, right?
Okay.
So when we apply this to childhood sexual abuse, right, we know that there are charities, organizations, nonprofits out there who care about the issue and who put the messaging out about the issue. But that messaging doesn't always resonate with the audience it's trying to hit, right? For example, for a really long time, a lot of the major charities that focused on this in the UK were using black and white messaging. It was all scaremongering. It was doom and gloom. There were photos of children cowering in a corner with their hands over their heads. It was videos of the most extreme acts, the most repeated acts. And all that did was, one, make the topic so unapproachable to talk about, but two, shapes the ideas in a lot of people's heads that childhood sexual abuse is a certain type of person, usually a young girl, a certain type of person who sexually harms, usually an older man, and a
Yeah.
very certain type of act. And we know from our lived experience and also the people that we've spoken with that childhood sexual abuse is so much more than that.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be able to communicate that if we don't do it in a more human, light touch, everyday way. And that is where the creative thinking comes into Secrets Worth Sharing.
Love that. That is so true as well. And there are a lot of charities. I think it's getting a little bit better now from
Yeah.
what I can see. But you're so right, especially say to take 10 years ago, all those posters with those girls. And don't get me wrong, obviously that does happen. And
Yeah,
that
totally.
is a visual representation of how it can be. But you're so right. We all of us know that the people that are listening that have lived experience, we know that is not always the case. And you're not always necessarily cowering in the corner either. I definitely wasn't. Be true. Yeah. So everything that you've just said in terms of what your process is, how you get away from the posters that you've just mentioned to what you make and you design.
Sure. So I think when it came to thinking about building something, right? And I really must stress, I was not out here to found a nonprofit. I really was like, I'm just gonna come and make a podcast. And we know podcast producing is a really difficult job, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I have an idea of what I would want, but is that representative of what survivors want? And even just to bring it back to my own experience for a little bit, but when I was trying to understand whether or not I'd even experienced abuse when I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
I was scrolling through like NSPCC websites where I was trying to find a resource that just felt less academic. And
Yeah.
I started to get the answers I was looking for, but I couldn't find anything that was specifically relevant to my race and culture. So I'm mixed race. I'm from a Vietnamese and a British Irish family. And there were certain concepts about the way that bodies and consent are communicated, about respecting and listening to your elders that I didn't feel were like factored into the advice about how to deal with your own abuse. And I thought if
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I'm experiencing, there must be many people out there who have similar experiences, right? So before I even decided like what it was, what the tone was going to be, I first was like, who are the people that I actually want to engage with this? And for me, it was two main groups of people, right? The first were anyone out there who felt like the resources that we currently had on child sex abuse didn't capture an aspect of their identity or an aspect of their life. So we've already touched on like identity-based things like your race, culture, religion, even.
Mm-hmm.
There's also another kind of group of people who were sexually abused by other children or by
Yeah.
women or even who had sexually harmed themselves like when they were younger and repeated behaviors, people who are trying to navigate dating. And those were the groups of people where I were like, yeah, where is the advice for these people? What happens if you're not seen by society as the archetype or the picture of what a survivor should be? So that was like
Yeah.
the first group, like tailored advice for that group. And then the second advice or the second group were the allies, right? Because just like with everything, the people who are most affected by the issue should not have to be the ones that advocate for their own care.
Yeah.
We see it in racism, we see it with menstrual health, we see it in so many sectors where people are just like, oh, I'm the one who's experienced by this thing. Yeah, I have to now go out and educate people.
Yeah.
So the second group was how do we target the group of people who are more likely to be sort of allies and support for survivors, but who don't know or don't care or don't think about this issue?
Yeah.
So it really just started with who are these groups? And then I just started doing a bit of research, talking around, like speaking to people. And that was when I started to engage with the community of people. And I was like, okay, there's other people who feel this same way. And then just exactly like what you did with me, I started crafting out, okay, what could those conversations look like? Who are the people that I want to engage with? Blah, blah, blah. And then shaping those out into episodes. And then making sure that the end of those episodes always included practical, actionable do's and don'ts about how
Yeah.
you have these conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that's it really. And just making sure that throughout that process, the person who's part of it is so active in how they craft what that experience is, craft what that advice is, review it. Nothing goes live without people's approval.
Mhm.
And making sure that you're actively working together on a solution because
Yeah.
no one has all the answers for this.
Yeah. I love the do's and don'ts that you have on your podcast. I've seen those and I think they are so informative and so great because it is a very much like you can listen to this and having these conversations help 100%. Of course they do. But the do's and don'ts are so important. There's so many things that people can say to a survivor that you would think, oh, I don't think you should probably say that, or maybe that's not the right angle to take, or actually, no, this is what you should do, and this is how you should support people. And I think they're really important because not everyone's going to understand it. And I think if you haven't experienced something, it's very hard to people can sympathize, but you're never going to be able to empathize with what a survivor has gone through.
Yeah.
And I do have to sometimes take that into account myself, where when I'm explaining what I'm feeling to someone that hasn't experienced it, and sometimes I get a little bit frustrated where I think, why are you not understanding where I'm coming from? I sometimes have to sit back and think, of course they're not, Chloe, because they haven't experienced it. It's like anything. So those do's and don'ts, I think, are really important. And I have seen those on your Instagram, and I think they're great. Thank you so much for explaining all of that. That was really helpful. And you, again, so articulate and you explaining it in such a beautiful way. So thank you very much. I would love to go on to what you've created, something called Serious Joy, which I just love as a concept, by the way. I think that's brilliant. These topics are really heavy. We all know that. And yet you're bringing something that sounds lighter almost. Can you explain to listeners what is Serious Joy in simple terms?
Yeah. Serious Joy is basically a method for how you talk about really difficult topics in a light touch but serious way. I don't know how else, I never know how else to say the serious bit. I've just started taking up volleyball, right? It's one of my latest hobbies that I'm going to probably drop in a few weeks. And I was in the middle of practice and someone asked me that dreaded question that we all hate to get in the sector. And it was like, what do you do for work? And I was like, and then I was like, oh, I run a child sex abuse charity. Whereas I think I started with charity, but then she started to get more interested. She's like, oh, sexual abuse, what? And then I said, yeah, but the way we do it is we try and encourage people to have these conversations joyfully. And she literally looked at me and was like, what? Like almost offended. And I totally understand that. And again, you never know who you're talking to and what their sexual harm might be. But I started unpacking it and I was like, people are so scared to even talk about the topic that we allow it to thrive in silence without even realizing. One thing that I truly believe is that a huge proportion of this issue can be prevented if we start to have those conversations. It's 100%. One of the fewest social issues where it's like the solution is almost laughably obvious, but it's just getting over that hurdle of having that conversation. And what we do at Secrets Worth Sharing is try to remove that hurdle, right? Stop it from being this huge, big catch-all topic of sexual abuse and make it like, okay, what are those little intersectional moments where we can start to plant the seed of sexual abuse and then just use it like you would anything. We talk about murder mysteries, crime podcasts in the same way that we talk about murder mysteries, crime podcasts. And I feel like you often hear a story on the street or people chatting on the tube about someone being decapitated or whatever. You do not get the same for sexual violence and sexual harm.
No.
And I'm not saying we should sensationalize it, but it definitely needs to be normalized because it happens to 1 in 4 people on average.
Yeah.
And that stat in itself really surprises people. But who's going around talking about it? Like, we haven't created a society where we make that easy to talk about.
Yeah.
So Serious Joy is a 9-step method that I worked on together with a group of survivors and from my background as a trauma-informed researcher, to think about, okay, how do we communicate the issue of sexual abuse but in a trauma-informed and positive way? And ultimately, the crux of it is we don't talk joyfully about the abuse itself, but we do take humour in the way it's currently responded to, right?
Yeah.
Because how are you telling me that I'm telling you about this one of the most worst things that have happened to me in my life, and then the first thing you say is, oh my God, why are you bringing this up now? Why didn't you tell someone sooner? Like the classic response, or are you sure that's what happened? Or maybe they were confused, or I was in an interview once with comedian Johnny Pelham, and he was telling me that he went out for a curry with his mates, and he told his friend at the curry, and the guy didn't know what to do and just offered him his naan bread. It's just, I often hear from survivors, and I think the stat in our community is something like 84% of people say that talking about the abuse was harder and more difficult than the abuse itself. And
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that childhood sexual abuse is awful, is abhorrent, is one of the worst things people go through. But the fact that the conversations that
Mhm.
we're getting off the back of that are even worse
Yeah.
tells you something about this issue. And I can't physically stop the abuse happening, but I can certainly prevent it by having these conversations
Yeah.
and talk to people about how they feel.
Yeah. Very true. So true. The conversations I've had since speaking my truth and coming forward are so much more awkward and so much more uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Yeah, like you said, the actual physical sexual abuse was horrific and always will be. But oh my goodness, some of these conversations that I have and just the pure response that I get from people, it is laughable. It is laughable and it is comical because you stand and you think, oh my God, I'm a lot stronger than than I was even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, really. So I've shifted my kind of thinking on it. So when I do turn, I'm very similar to you, and people say to me, well, what do you do? And I'm like, oh God, I have to say that I've launched a podcast talking around the subject of child sexual abuse and helping survivors, because I know that people go, you can see their body language go, oh God, okay, let's move on. Different topic, different subject. I don't like talking about it because I know that people are going to react like that. I'm getting better at it, and I'm getting better at like what you did, where you dissect it and you explain it. But it is, and I've still had responses from people saying, people won't listen to that, will they? Why would people listen to a podcast on child sexual abuse? That's a bit weird. I'm like, oh, exactly what you were saying. Why do people listen to crime documentaries of people being decapitated? Why is that more accepted and okay to listen to? And these crime series that we watch on Netflix, and they're okay and people love them.
Yeah.
But when it comes to this, it's that, yeah, it is interesting and there's still so much to be done. But I think the work that you're doing is incredible. And I love the serious joy. I think those two words together shouldn't work, but they do. And it's such a powerful sentence.
Totally. Totally. Thank you. And you know what? It's so funny because as you were talking, I was thinking Dr. Julia Shaw is a criminal psychologist, and she has a podcast about
Yeah.
like basically it's called Bad People, and it's about like
Yeah.
murders, right? And I can't remember the exact stat, but she often says like a majority of survivors of sexual violence listen to crime,
Mm-hmm.
like real crime. And a lot of real crime listeners or consumers are also women or people who are marginalized gender, because it's like they understand what it's like to be like blinkers on in the street. And so
Yeah.
these stories aren't a million miles for them. And again, I find that a really fascinating case when you bring that to childhood sexual abuse, because people often react like you, Chloe. I've had people go, that's so depressing.
Yeah.
That's getting really common, especially where I live now is really middle class. So people are just like, oh, that's so depressing. They don't get into the like
Yeah.
reality of it. But it's really funny because the actual survivors, in my experience, are quite happy that these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
And so we talk about another common question we get in this space is, aren't you just re-triggering people who've gone through this, bringing this topic up time and time again? And first of all, yes, that is a real issue that we have to think about. And we've really thought around the parameters of how we content want the work that we do to an extent. But also, you'll find 9 times out of 10 the people who've experienced sexual harm are really excited about the podcast, and it's the people who never touched this issue before who are the ones confused and concerned and cowering away,
or the ones that feel like it's being projected onto them. I think that's a massive element as well, because since launching this, since being a lot more vocal on social media, the amount of comments that I've had from what I can tell, men, is just been horrific. And it's because you feel like I'm projecting it onto you, and that says more about you than it says about me and survivors and what I'm actually trying to talk about. And that is another element of it as well. People don't like hearing about it because they think that you're talking about them, which most of the time you probably are, because that's what I always say as well. most people know a survivor or a victim of childhood sexual abuse or sexual violence. But all of us will also know a perpetrator. They don't know that they know, but they will. They would have been in contact with them down the pub or in their family. And when you say and you start talking about these, it's always the people that feel like you're talking to them. And it's so generic. I'm not talking to you personally. I'm talking about I'm generalizing it. But the fact that you're getting so personally triggered says everything about you more than it says about what we're discussing and the topic of child sexual abuse. So I think that's really important as well, because the amount of comments I've had, and the DMs, it's disgusting. It really is. And I'm sure that you've probably had it. And most people that are on social media that are vocal about what we do have probably been hit hard by just disgusting, hideous comments. And I'm strong enough at the moment to either ignore or to come back with a comment myself. But yeah, I've steered off in a different direction then, but yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sad and sorry to hear you've had that.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating when there are so many avenues in your life. Like, you're an actor, right? Like, you could have taken so many different avenues in your life and you have chosen this one.
Yeah.
And it is very much at the moment a hard path, and one that does just get met with a lot of criticism because it is so personal. People don't often put child and sex together.
No.
So putting those together, you're offering yourself up almost to become a mascot of what that experience is. And I think for some people as well, like you mentioned about men and comments coming from men, I think another really important thing to remember is that male survivors are very common as well. One in seven boys will experience some form of sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. And I think that when we talk about like gendered perspectives, that manifests in a very different way. There's almost an expectation that boys and men had to be strong and fight off what had happened. They might not recognize themselves as a victim. There might even be a bit of jealousy and anger that we get to be out there and talking about our experiences, and that they get positively held as well as negatively held. I don't know, but like I've also found in my experience, like when we see such a strong reaction, where does that actually come from?
Yeah.
And trying to hold that with understanding, which is so hard when you're the one like being beaten down for it. And that is why, by the way, like I very rarely look at comments anymore, positive or negative. Like I don't want my head to be bigged up, and I don't want to be shot down, because I remember I'm not got a big following, but I remember my first like viral moment was when I did that. I'm blah blah blah, of course, trend.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a child sex abuse survivor, of course I have a chronic stomach problem or whatever. And one of the trolls in that just started atting me about my appearance and comparing me to this gaunt alien thing from Star Wars. And I was like, first of all, I had to look up what that was. But also, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
What is the point of this? And so I've just decided, like, one, I don't look at the comments anymore. I have teams and people that do that with me, but we've agreed at Secrets, if you're not the one in or responsible for the content, then it's okay to check it for those that are.
Yeah.
And two, like, it's really crazy to think, why do I owe people my experiences as a survivor in order to be believed as an expert in this space, or an expert in this space? So I tend not to talk about what happened to me, like personally, and the details, and that's my kind of way of getting through it. But I really respect people who do, and I think it's such a challenge there's almost like an additional layer that you have to face there, with like people picking up your story as though it is a true crime, which in some cases it is. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there's part of me that thinks, oh, should I have been so vocal about what happened to me? But then since doing this and since having all those, and don't get me wrong, I've had wonderful people comment as well, and so many beautiful messages, and I'm focusing more on that than the negative. But we all know that it's very hard to focus more on the positives than it is on the negatives. The negatives always outweigh the positives, because that's just how we see ourselves, and that's just how we take in information. I am very conscious of it, and I think that's very important as well, knowing what I'm doing. And I'm saying I'm a lot stronger than I was a couple of years ago, and because it's all happened now, I feel like I need to keep going, to keep pushing because I'm getting these comments, and I'm thinking this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I will continue to scream and shout about it, because of people, and those that in the end of the day, these people are keyboard people, aren't they? They're just behind a little screen. They just want to troll. They just want a reaction, and I do understand that. But yeah, I feel I need to continue because for me, it's been, I love to swear, so I'm going to swear right now, just in case people are listening in front of kids. It's a big fuck you moment for me. I've been through so much shit, through hell and back, for so many years of my life, and it is very much now I'm in that powerful moment of my life where I'm like, fuck you. I don't care anymore. I don't give a shit. I'm going to scream and shout as much as I possibly can, and I'm going to ignore these comments. I might reply back to you because I do a witty comment back. It's one of my things that I like to do. But I think you have to be in that headspace as well, not to take it personally. I just laugh at them sometimes as well. I'm like, oh, here we go. Here we go again. It's another keyboard person behind a computer screen. Going back to Serious Joy, I think what you're doing is amazing, and it's such an important thing. And like I said, Serious Joy, I think, is just so great. I'd love to move on to your creativity and your storytelling aspect of what you do as well. You bring a lot of that to what you do. And as someone with a performing background on myself, you've mentioned I'm an actor, I find that really powerful. And I'm a very visual person as well. So where does acting and performance come into this work, if any?
Ooh.
Do you
Ooh.
think?
What a fun question. So I was like an amateur thespian back in the day. I did student amateur dramatics at uni. And I just love, and it's funny, there's quite a few survivors in the space that do similar things. So I'm thinking, like, for example, Patrick, who's like in his 70s now, he's on our podcast, the Old People episode, which I don't know if it will be out by the time this comes out, but he often talks about the fact that acting allows perfect escapism, right? For me, acting allowed a new level of empathy. I did a lot of roles, but I was really drawn to roles that had elements of trauma. Wonder why.
Me too.
And one of my favorite and most difficult roles was I was playing a sex worker on the street. And so someone who was like being pimped out by their partner, but in a non-consensual situation because, and I say non-consensual because I think some people enter sex work and find it fulfilling and find meaning in it. But in this case, it was not that. It was exploitation. And she thought that all the money was going towards savings and a house and whatnot, but actually he was using it to fund a drug addiction. And again, it was a really interesting way to learn about new people, new experiences, but also how you can portray that in different ways. And when I think you're training to be an actor, you often do these really random exercises. Like we've all seen the memes where it's, okay, now we're going to do an exercise where we're going to be a giraffe. Like, what the hell? And then and now we're going to be a blade of grass and interact with the space. And I'm like, what is going on? But I think you need a certain level of like almost disassociation to put your body into a new environment like that. And I think that really helps when you're being an interviewer or when you're sharing stories, because you learn through body language how to read and understand and interact with people. And I think my early days of acting only made me better at my job because I try very hard to tune into what someone is telling me beyond just their words and to reflect that in a way that they feel is appropriate to their experience.
Yeah.
Is that enough of an answer?
Yeah, that was a lovely answer. I think that's so true as well. I think there's an element of empathy as well, what you have, because I think a lot of people that have experience that we have, that are survivors, we have a lot of empathy, specifically with all the survivors that I've met in the last couple of years. Everyone has an amazing amount of empathy. They're always so empathetic. They're always understanding. I think that comes into it. But acting definitely is, I'm using it in the work that I'm doing. And when I get up and I do my speeches and the podcast and interacting with people, acting is performing, I suppose you can call it more like that. But it does really help with the work that we're in, I think. One question I'd love to ask you, and I would love to get your opinion on it. Why do creative approaches sometimes work better than traditional education, do you think? Because I think that they do, but I'd love to hear what you think on that.
Because traditional education is boring. It's really funny. So I was actually having a conversation with someone who works in sexual violence the other day. And I was just like, don't get me wrong, love everything we're all doing as a collective sector in a majority of cases.
Yeah.
But sometimes I find it so boring. Traditional work about sexual violence looked like an 100-page report, which then goes into legislation, which then goes into structured campaigns, blah, 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 which feeds back into education. And there are some organizations that are doing that fantastically. Like I'm thinking School of Sex Ed, everyone's invited, those kinds of groups.
Yeah.
And but I wouldn't say they're doing education in a traditional way. I would say they're shaking things up. They're making things really interactive. But nobody is going to read a 100-page report. And if they are, it's because they're already totally invested in the sector.
Yeah.
So I think your question is great, because I think all aspects of fighting sexual violence are needed and important. Like, you go and write your 100-page report if that's what you need to do. And if that's what you need to influence the academic sector, we're all here for you. We're all cheering it. But if we want to interact with those of us who don't talk about or think about sexual violence on a day-to-day basis, an 100-page academic report isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
A 2-hour PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint slides isn't going to cut it. A doom and gloomy story isn't going to cut it. Sensational stories, sometimes they do cut it.
Agreed.
But the end result of that can sometimes be, oh, but that happened to that person, it's never going to happen to me. And what I always say to people is, it never happens to someone until it does. And if more than 4 people, it's likely that it has already entered your sphere.
Yeah.
And so creative approaches, again, going all the way back to that poster, it's about thinking about ways to approach a problem differently with the actual people you're trying to approach at hand in mind.
Yeah.
And so I guess if I was to reframe the question, it'd be like, yes, creative approaches work so well. And they specifically work when you're trying to engage people who are otherwise unengaged, or what I would call the potential allies. Because once they're like invested, once they've decided to do a PhD, once they want to be a politician or like shape laws and blah, 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 then we can get into trad education, 100-page report territory. Before then, I think it's just about using film, using media. We do a lot of that. We've got a film club where we critique scenes of childhood sexual abuse in TV.
Yeah,
that's a great educational tool. Obviously, we've got the podcast and the digital media, and it's just about shaking things up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And traditional education, like you were saying, is vitally important. But when you're trying to communicate things like this into the community where people don't think about it on a daily basis, how can we use creativity? How can we use music and film and acting and performance to get that across? We all know that people respond to creativity. That's why we have the movies. That's why we have musical theatre. That's why people continually go to the cinema and watch films and go to the theatre, even though it costs an absolute fortune to go. We still go and we still turn up because it makes us feel good as well. But also we retain that information so much better. And I don't think that's just necessarily people that are more visually or more creative. I think that's just people in general that retain more information. And like you were saying, if we're going to get this point across, creativity, I think, is a great way of doing it. Not everyone's going to want to sit down and read a 100-page information about statistics. I know that I'm very interested in it, and I potentially would, but I still would be thinking, cool, blimey, this is a lot. And also we have to factor in neurodiverse needs as well, and people that are not going to be able to sit there and read facts and 100-page statistical information. I know that I've got very bad dyslexia, I've got ADHD. No way. My brain will not work like that. I'm a very creative visual person. I know not everyone is, but just having those, that both of them there for people, I think is really important. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate your input on it.
And also, following on from that point, like, it's a really good way of diversifying your audience. So for a really long time, in the early days of Secrets, we were doing panel events, right? So for example, cultural sensitivity and childhood sexual abuse. And I remember I was hosting it, so we had a lot of Vietnamese community members come, and my co-host was Tamil, so we had a lot of Sri Lankan people turning up. and all of them already worked in sexual violence, and a majority of them were female. And like, I remember when we turned it and we did a very similar thing. We changed it up to using film, and we used Vietnamese film and Tamil film, and we were using that as a way to educate people about childhood sexual abuse specific to their culture. Suddenly we had men turning up, and it was the same when I was doing events down in Brighton, right? Like, I was doing events on childhood sexual abuse and queerness, and that was great for attracting the trans community, who was so often overlooked and often vilified in our sector. That was fantastic. And then once we'd got that community engaged and we started doing like childhood sexual abuse in comedy, childhood sexual abuse in Hollywood, then suddenly all of these communities were turning up to our events. We had more trans people, we had more men. And I was asking people, I was like, why now? Like, what is it about the events now that has made you decide to turn up? And they would say, because you've taken that step away, you've made it easier to empathize, because now we're not talking about real people and their experiences. We're talking about fictionalized experiences. And then you can use the fictionalized experience to reflect on your own or to educate other people, but you don't have to disclose about yourself. So it's exactly that, isn't it, Chloe? It's like with your people going to the theatre and spending an arm and a leg, like it's to experience that real escapism and admiration for this skill of being able to tune in and empathize. And then it's the chats after. It's going with someone and then being like, oh my God, I can't believe this character did that, or I would have read it this way. It's such a useful tool to opening up empathy, which is what you need if you're going to support a survivor in the way they actually need. Because yes, we've all gone through some form of sexual harm, and that's awful, and have very similar reactions to that, but those needs will look really different.
Absolutely. Thank you again for you're so articulate and you explain things in such a beautiful way. So thank you. Yes, love that. 100%. I agree.
You caught me on a good day. I'm normally rambling. By 6 p.m, my husband's, what are you saying? I don't understand.
That's me. I'm like, well, I don't. At the start of this, I was thinking, what am I asking you? What am I engage brain, Chloe? But thank you. That was really informative, and I love that you do the film. You've invited me to one. I'm going to see if I can go, because I think that would just be. It's really interesting. I love watching films and then I'm very much one of these people as well, that I'll watch something and then I hold on to it for days and I rethink everything and I dissect it and so definitely, I'm definitely going to see if I can get there.
Thank you.
I'd love to go on to your organisation and your impact. So tell me about Secrets Worth Sharing. What is the mission and what are you trying to change with Secrets?
Okay, big funder level question that. At its core, all we want to do is give people practical, approachable, and intersectional advice about how to talk about childhood sexual abuse, so that they can be a better support to the survivors in their life. So think about it as, we know we are training the potential allies to survivors, because I do believe that it's the people who feel they are least affected by the issue who are the ones that most need the support and care with how to approach this topic. So that the end goal is they can prevent sexual abuse happening in their own communities by talking about it, but also support people if it does. So that's the aim, that's the goal, that's the mission that will never change. The way we do it currently is by using film, media, and design as a light touch point to talk about it. And as I said, everything we do is with serious joy. So we create a light touch interaction about how we can talk about childhood sexual abuse through film, through a podcast, through blog posts, through TikTok, whatever, but always with that element of light-hearted, educational, making fun of the way people react, but never the actual act of abuse itself. And using that method to gently teach people, oh, okay, abuse is more than what I thought it was. It encapsulates more acts. It's more types of people, because we know anyone can experience sexual harm and anyone can cause sexual harm. So really understanding that. And it's also learning that, oh, okay, my reaction about telling someone they can forget about it now, or asking too much about the details of what happened, or forcing them to report to the police if they don't want to, or getting really angry on their behalf, so much so that they have to comfort me. Those might not be appropriate responses. And it's also about using all of the resources that we do to offer people active choices, because again, like, people aren't always going to react in the same way. We've got a podcast episode coming out in a few months about childhood sexual abuse and the law. In an ideal world, these things wouldn't happen. So that's the real ideal world. But in another ideal world, if sexual abuse happened, the person who's caused the sexual harm is brought to justice and accountability.
Yeah.
And I don't think personally that the current legal justice system is the way forward for that.
No.
And so the reason why we created the Legal and Justice episode and have accompanied it with a poster that gives people, okay, these are the step-by-step process of what should happen if you chose to go via the legal and justice route. The podcast accompanying it goes, and these are all the times where it could go wrong. These are the survivors dropping out. There's only an 11% conviction rate with rape in itself.
Mm-hmm.
What does that say to society about the way we think about these acts, about the way that we punish? What does it do to the people who have sexually harmed, who often don't get a chance to educate, learn what they've done wrong, rehabilitate, or get a chance at transformative or restorative justice? Like, it just doesn't help. So another key thing about what we do is take the existing information that we have on childhood sexual abuse, that is common knowledge, and we offer people choice. If you do decide to go through the legal and justice system, these are all the things we wish we would have known. But also, if you decide not to go through, that is totally okay too. And here are some other methods that we've tried, or other resources we can signpost you to. I feel like I've really rambled, but...
No, you haven't at all. No, that you've answered the question again beautifully. And I love that you're doing an episode on the justice system, because I have a lot to say about it, which I'm sure a lot of survivors do. Yeah. And I find I'm definitely going to tune into that one, because I'll find it very interesting. And I love how you're taking both angles. If you don't want to do it, it's totally fine. This is what you can do. If you do, this is what will happen. Because it's also a huge thing for me when I came forward to the police in 2017, and it took nearly 3 years to get to court. But I was given hardly any information of what was going to happen. When I went forward to the police and I had those 2 police officers come around to my house and take my statement, there was no, this is what could happen. I was always told throughout the whole investigation, it probably won't get to court. It probably won't get through to CPS. He probably won't get found guilty. I was constantly given the negatives. And I think the reason that my detective was doing that was he was trying to protect me in a way to say, we all know that a lot of these cases, they don't get justice. Like you were just saying, 11% of rape cases, it's so low, and the bar is so low, which it shouldn't be. But I wasn't ever told the process of it and what could happen and what can't happen. And also, what could happen if he does get found guilty and he does go to prison? What am I going to experience? What are those feelings going to be? How is that going to sit with me? Had none of that. There has to be some more support for the survivors and the victims. But there's a massive thing about rehabilitation. A lot of people don't want to think about that and to talk about that. It makes people very uncomfortable. I had a call a couple of days ago about that, and it does make people very uncomfortable, just as talking about child sexual abuse does. But I think that's also another element that has to come into it. And it's very important, because if we don't rehabilitate these people, or if we don't get to the source before it happens, it's going to just keep going. It's just going to keep happening. So I'm definitely going to tune into that episode. I think that's going to be really fascinating, and I have a lot to say about it. So I'm going to stop there. Otherwise, I will ramble for hours.
I really want to know more, but yeah, okay.
I will ramble for hours. But yeah, thank you for that. Again, like I said, you're articulating and answering the questions so beautifully. I said at the beginning that you've worked at a global level.
Yes.
Excuse me, like representing the UK, which is huge, by the way. Absolutely huge. So
yeah, I still can't believe it. I feel like such a imposter.
No. I know what you mean, though. I do know how, because we also get that massive feeling of imposter syndrome as survivors, I think, as well. But incredible, and such a huge moment for you. So you should be incredibly proud. So what did that experience show you about where we are right now? And I think we have touched on this a little bit, but do you think we are moving in the right direction?
Oh, big question. Okay. Do I think we're moving in the right direction? I would say yes and no, because this answer really does depend on how different groups tackle childhood sexual violence. I find the global space in childhood sexual abuse organizing one of the most beautiful, thoughtful, and affirming communities of my career.
Wow.
I have met so many people from all over the world who have been exactly where we are, who've done this work relative to their own cultures, communities, experiences, and who have found so much joy in doing it together. It is something that the experiences I get from when I go to those global movements are things that I will always take with me. So I'm thinking particularly the Brave movement, who are the movement, they're like a global movement of survivor activists, and of which I'm part of. And I went to one of they were celebrating their 4th birthday like last week, a few weeks ago. And like from the second I went to that door to the second I left, I shed tears, which, if you know me, is rare. The house, like, I do not cry, which is something I'm working on, but shed tears. One of the survivors had a friend in a village who'd made us all some soap, like organic soap, and he was handing out all his soap. One of the ladies I hadn't seen in 3 years now got her PhD. Another one's had a daughter. Like, it was the most beautiful. And also, actually, I think it's really important to share, like, one of them had cancer and was going to die, and I wasn't going to see them again. And that was really heavy as well. But in that space, I saw so much hope. And they're not just acting. I think when you go into a global level, it's about tuning into the global community on childhood sexual violence. And that looks quite different to local and national communities.
Yeah.
And in the global way, it's okay, how do we encourage governments to understand that this is an issue? We get them to make pledges, like creating survivor councils. So Germany is a really good example of this. I love Germany today. Germany is creating the world's first survivor council that advises government, all made up of survivors of sexual abuse. And that model is being implemented and explored in lots of different countries, Canada being one of them. There's another board that's looking at having Indigenous American people on board, and they've been really spearheading the movement for survivor councils in the States and in Canada. And there is so much wealth to learn from people because all of their governments are different, right? And when we look at childhood sexual abuse as an issue, actually, there's this index called the Out of the Shadows Index. And I think it's incorporated data from 68 or 80 of the world's countries, and that accounts for 80% of the global population of children. And they have ranked each country based on their prevention and response pathways. Not a single country in the whole world has scored higher than 83 out of 100. And the 83 is actually the UK. Yeah. And I think if that I'm sure surprises you, given the way we've talked about the legal and justice system, blah, blah, blah. What we have is supposedly best in class, and yet it's not good enough. And actually, the government of Colombia, whilst not scoring as highly overall, is the best at prevention. They've got the best legislation when it comes to prevention and education and care, like higher than the UK and stuff like that. And so when we ask the question, like, do I think we're going in the right direction? I think we go in the right direction when countries and their governments listen to their survivors and their people.
Yeah.
When representatives from Western and Northern European countries learn that there is so much they can learn from countries from the global South.
Yeah.
Because there is just a sense of community care that I just, like, I'm talking about Vietnam, for example, now. There's a level of community care that I see there that I just do not see practiced in the same way in the UK, and that's partly cultural.
Yeah.
And I just think when we learn to not be so bordered about the way that we think about sexual violence, because online trafficking and childhood sexual abuse material online is a huge issue. So even if we had great laws in the UK, but they're not in the Philippines, people who sexually harm in the UK can still pay for, exploit children in other countries in the world. There's so much hope and there's so much positivity. And when I represented the UK, that was at the first global ministerial in recognising childhood violence. And I think that's beautiful and great to see that, like, governments are starting to get on board with this. The second one's in November in the Philippines. Like, it's starting to become a regular thing. That's a great direction. But
Yeah.
with these things, I always think, who is it a good direction for? And I think it's
Yeah.
really important here to highlight that LGBT community kids, there's very little mention of them still in global organizing. How do we continue to think about who is marginalized and who gets to be a survivor? What legislations, acts are to protect them? How do we see childhood sexual abuse across the world and take those messages home to our own countries? And I
Yeah.
think in this certain political climate, there's a huge challenge with that, because I think some people are additionally victimized as well as being survivors.
Yeah.
And I hope that the sector learns to see that and learns to bring all survivors along on their journey, and not just the ones that we traditionally associate,
Yeah.
like me, for example.
Yeah.
But also consider like male survivors, trans survivors, genderqueer survivors. And I think if we're able to do that and listen to the people that we're trying to support and bring more of them in, then then we can really, I don't know how much more I can stress that I really do believe that this issue can be eradicated when we learn to talk about it and to recognize the signs. It really is everyone's responsibility.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point there. It's everyone's responsibility, because I think a lot of people forget that when it comes to childhood violence, sexual abuse, violence in general against women and men. It's everyone's responsibility to make this go away. And child sexual abuse specifically, I think people don't want to think it ever happens to them, or it's one of those things that we just go, oh, it didn't happen to me, so I don't have to think about it. It's very similar to everything really. It's, you can think about it when it comes to cancer. Oh, I haven't got cancer, I don't have to think about it, I don't have to worry about it. And when it does happen to you, you think, oh shit, okay, I need to. So I think what you just said there is really important. It's everyone's responsibility. Until everyone starts talking about this and taking it as seriously as it actually is, we're not going to eradicate it. It's going to continue to happen, and it has to stop. So, I think what you were saying is so right. I think we are moving in the right direction. What you're talking about, your experiences in your global work, when you're meeting all those people, I think you can see that it is definitely moving in the right direction. We still have a lot of work to do, I think, definitely. There is still a lot of work to do, but we are moving and we are speaking a lot more. And organizations like yourself and you talking in your podcast, this podcast that you're on today, all the charities that we have, it is starting to become a conversation, but we just have to keep going until it does stop. And I really hope that it's probably going to be not in my lifetime, which makes me sad, but I'd like to think potentially in my daughter's lifetime, and even if I do have grandchildren, it's one of those things. But I think we are. It's just going to take a long time.
Yeah.
I think.
I think you're so right. And like with any huge social issue, it takes time.
Yeah.
It really takes time. We've manifested a culture of silence around this issue for millennia. It's going to take a really long time to undo that. But even within our generations, we're seeing that change. There's people in that Brave movement who are in their 70s who are like, I was the only person doing this work. We already know how lonely it is doing this work. There still aren't many of us now, but there are way more of us now than there were back in like the 80s. Already is a huge change and a huge hope.
Yeah.
Yes, people spit their food out when I tell them what I do for a living, but I'm not a social outcast because of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? Yes, people still have a very certain idea of what they see as sexual violence informed by media and TV. But yes, there are some depictions of sexual violence on TV that are starting to head in the right direction.
Yeah.
That is hope. That is change.
Yeah.
Yes, trans people of color, neurodivergent and disabled people have been left out of this conversation for so long. But we're also starting to see people from those groups becoming advocates. We're starting to see a little bit of change in the way charities think about this issue. There is progress. So yeah, it's difficult. It's so hard. And people drop off this journey. Like the average person who works in childhood sexual violence sector stays in it about 2 years and then moves on, right? And that is so understandable. It can be a really grueling space to be in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll end up doing it forever. Like, I don't know, but I'm really happy with what I'm learning in this stage of my life, and I'm finding it really healing.
Yeah.
And I know that there are people who can't do this because they, for many understandable reasons, don't want to talk about what happened and don't want to be public with it. But there are also ways that you can advocate anonymously
Yeah.
without disclosing.
Yeah.
Sharing resources is one, donating is one, signing
Yeah.
petitions, engaging in content. That's all the things that gets funds for people to do the work they do.
Yeah.
So it really is everyone's responsibility, but also there is such a range of ways that you can do this work. Just try and do something. Share the Be Brave podcast, tune into Secrets Worth Sharing,
Yeah.
turn up to our events, write to charities about whether or not they're being inclusive in their practices, rally governments. Like, there are always small things we can do that don't have to mean we all suddenly have to become child sex abuse activists.
Yeah.
But we can certainly all be allies in small ways.
Absolutely. Allies being the main, 100%. We can all do something, and you can all do it in small ways. And like you said, you don't have to be doing what we're doing, where we're talking about it and we're very public and open and out, public facing. You don't have to be. And I certainly wasn't several years ago, but I
No.
still was behind the scenes, making sure that I was supporting and I was following all these people. And I worked for the charities, and so there's definitely ways that you can do it. And I think, yeah, you said as well, engaging in content that what we're doing and other people are doing is so important as well, because it does help push it out to other people as well. And I'm always asking, follow, share, repost, retag, whatever it may be, because it does help. It does help, and it does get it out there for other people. Thank you so much, Sophia. I think we've had such a wonderful conversation, and I think it's been very informative. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything. One question I always ask people that come onto the podcast is, for people that are listening, is there anything that you'd like to say to them? Any advice, anything? It can be absolutely anything that you would like to say to survivors or allies or whoever's listening to this podcast today.
You never know when you plant the seed of childhood sexual abuse where that flower is going to bloom. And what I mean by that is, when I talk personally about my own experience for a hot sec, the only reason that I disclosed about what had happened to me was because I found out that the person who'd abused me also abused somebody else, and that person's family and that person spoke out about it, and then that was what encouraged me. That's an example of a big seed, right? You never know, if you share a resource, if you like a podcast and repost it on your page, if you speak to your loved ones about something that's happening on the news around sexual violence, you never know who actually really needs your support as an ally and was just waiting for you to plant the seed so that they could have this conversation. And that seed does not have to be scary. And I'm certainly not encouraging people to go, did you experience sexual abuse? I've just listened to this really good podcast.
Yeah.
No.
Please don't do that.
Please don't do that. But something akin to,
Yeah.
oh my God, did you see the way I've been watching The Pit recently, like a medical drama? There's a really interesting scene on that where they do a forensic exam about someone who's experienced violence, or a doctor just threatened someone they thought was a sex offender. What do you think of that? Or blah, blah, blah. I've just been trying to understand how I think about these things and pausing. Sometimes people are looking for someone to talk to and someone who will support them. And it is always a way of knowing a deeper aspect of that person, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think when someone trusts you with an experience like their sexual violence, they are saying to you, I want you to be someone who shows up for me, who supports me, and I want you to know a deeper part of me that will help you to understand me better. It's a gift. It's a gift that deserves the right amount of grace and care and holding. And unfortunately, we don't know how to hold people who've experienced sexual violence because we're not taught how to.
Yeah.
But by modeling that you're someone who can be spoken to by the way you react to film, TV, the news, you do not know what seed you're planting for someone else.
Yeah. So powerful. I love that. It's beautifully said. Thank you. That's so true. Yeah. No, I don't know how that do is just, I'm not going to say anything else because that you just explained it so beautifully. So thank you, Sophia. Honestly, this conversation has been a really powerful reminder that awareness is beginning and it is there and it is continuing, and we are getting slowly, but we're getting there. And that we spoke about creativity, design, and new ways of thinking are such a huge part of actually creating change. And I think what you're doing is incredible, and your work and how much you've dedicated to it is just really inspiring. Thank you so much. It's been a really lovely conversation today, and I'm so happy that we managed to do it. Yeah, thank you
Oh
so
my
much.
God, my pleasure. Thank you so much. It's my first time like really going through the same process, but on the other
On
side.
the other
So I'm
side, yeah.
so grateful. Like I've learned so much too.
Oh, thank you. It's been beautiful. And if always, if this episode has resonated with you, please share it. Please keep sharing because conversations like this, they help push it forward. And if you're listening, you're not alone. And as always, be brave. And yeah, thanks so much, Sophia. It's been lovely speaking to you.
Oh, of course.